Mikhail Tal Saga only on Chess Radio Kolkata. Now, this game was played between Mikhail Tal from Latvia versus Ripati. Tal was playing with the white pieces, and this game was played in 2-6 1949. So the game starts with e4, d4, c5, the Sicilian defense. Now Tal replied with knight f3, knight c6, now d4. So c into d4 and knight into d4, the open Sicilian. Now knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop e2, g6. Now Tal replies with bishop e3, now bishop g7. Everyone is developing their piece. Now short castle, knight b3, now bishop e6, f4, and knight a5. But just before that, we just look at around. If queen c8, the move queen c8, so the game could be goes like king h1, now rook d8, bishop g1, d5, e5, knight e4, knight b5, g5, f into g5, knight into e5, knight into a7, queen b8, knight b5, knight c4. Now knight on the fifth rank is goes to d4. Now knight into g5, and after knight c5, white has a great advantage over here. Okay, so just get back to the game. After f4, the opponent replies with knight a5. Now Tal goes with knight d4. Let me show you another line, that is knight captures a5. Then game could be goes like queen into a5, bishop f3, bishop c4, now rook e1, rook f to d8, queen d2, and queen c7. And the game could be fairly equal at this position. Let's back to the position. Now after knight a5, if Tal replies with f5, then game could be goes like bishop c4, now bishop d3, bishop into d3, c into d3, and d5. Okay, so just get back to our game. After knight a5, Tal replies with knight d4, and his opponent responds with the bishop c4. Now after bishop d3, rook c8, h3, a6, queen d2, rook e8, f5. Bit of strange move. Now d5 and f into g6. Instead of f into g6, we can also look into the option like e5. If e5, then that is knight e4, bishop into e4, and bishop into f1. And black is having an exchange up. Or from e5, you can also see that is knight e4. Now if queen e1, then bishop into e5, and black is manage to gain some profit over here. But let's back to our game. After f cross g6, opponent replied with h into g6. Now e5, knight e4, knight into e4, d into e4, now bishop into c4, knight into c4, queen f2, and knight into e5. Now black has a slight advantage over here. Now rook a to d1, queen c7, and queen h4, and opponent replies with knight c6. So instead of knight c6, he could also go for queen c4. But at the game, after queen h4, opponent replied with knight c6. Now rook into f7 and king into f7. Now instead of king into f7, there are two options. Like the first option is knight e5. So Tal could reply with rook into g7 check, and black having a huge advantage over here, and from the queen into f7 position we could also see that is a queen e5. Let me show you guys. That is the position, and after this position black plays queen into f7. But if he plays queen e5, then game could be goes like rook f to f1 and knight b4. Okay, although you can see from this position like queen into e5, white could also go for knight into c6. Now rook into c6, bishop d4, bit of strange move. Now queen into d4 check, and black has a huge advantage. Although you can see from this position like queen f2, then black could goes for the bishop f6, and black is gaining the advantage. Let's back to our game. After rook into f7, king into f7, Tal replies with rook f1 check. So here we can see the other alternatives like queen h7. Now game could be goes like knight into d4, bishop into d4, e5, rook f1 check, king e6, queen into g6 check, king d5, and bishop b6. Okay. So after rook f1 check, black goes king g8. So here we can see another option like bishop f6, a bit of strange move. So Tal can finish it easily with queen h7 check, king f8, and knight e6. That is the checkmate. Okay. So after rook f1 check, king g8. Now Tal replies with knight e6. Now queen e5, knight g5, and bishop h6. Although you can see the options like queen f6, so game could be goes like queen h7 check, king f8, queen into g6, queen into f1 check, king into f1, knight e5, and knight e6. Now you can see white has a great advantage over here. Although from this position you can also see another line with queen f6, that is queen h7 check, king f8, queen into g6, knight e5, and knight h7. That is also winning for white. So let's go back to our game. After knight e6, that is queen e5, knight e6 and queen e5. Now knight g5, bishop h6. Now Tal replies with his own style, that is queen into h6. Now queen g7, queen h4, and knight d8. I don't know what this move is actually doing, because this knight is stuck to protect all those squares. So let's back to our game. After queen h4, black could also reply with rook f8. In that case, that is rook into f8 check, rook into f8 check, rook into f8, knight e6, queen into b2, queen h6, queen a1 check, bishop c1, rook f7, and queen into g6 check. And that's a huge advantage for white. Okay, so let's back to the position. Like after queen h4, it is also possible to reply with the rook f8, but after rook into f8 check and rook into f8, Tal's replied like knight e6 and queen f6, knight g5, and queen g7. Now that's a bit of equal position. So in the game the opponent replies with knight d8. Now bishop b6, e6. Now Tal capture, bishop into d8, c into d8, knight into e6, rook into e6, queen into d8 check, king h7 and queen h4 check. Okay, now here you can see if you black just wants to protect, then that could be devastating. So let's just get back to our game. After king h7, Tal could also reply with queen f8. So the game could be goes like queen into f8, rook into f8, e3 and rook f1, and white is a winning position. So let's back to our game. After bishop b6, that is e6. Now bishop into d8, c into d8, knight into e6, rook into e6, queen into d8 check, king h7, queen h4 check. Now opponents replied with king g8, although he could reply with queen h6 and then rook f7 could be met, but opponents replied with king g8. Now that is rook d1. Now rook e8, rook d8, queen f7, b3, e3, rook into e8 check, queen into e8, king f1, queen e5, queen d8 check, king g7, queen d7 check, king h6, queen into b7. And at this position both players can agree for a draw. Okay, now we are going to see the game once again. Now we can see the game with the engine analyze. Okay, so it's e4, c5, the Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight c6, d4. Now c into d4, knight into d4, knight f6, knight c3, d6. Now bishop e2, g6, bishop e7, bishop g7, both sides short castle, knight b3, bishop e6, f4, knight f5, knight d4, bishop c4, bishop d3, rook c8, h3, a6, queen d2. Now rook e8, f5, d5. Now here are some exchanges like f into g6 and h into g6. Now e5, knight e4. Now knight into e4, d into e4, bishop into c4, and after knight into c4, Tal played queen f2. Now knight into e5 and rook a to d1, queen c7. Tal replied with queen h4, knight c6, rook into f7, king into f7, rook f1 check, king g8. Now knight e6, queen e5. Tal replied with knight g5. Now bishop h6, queen into h6, queen g7, queen h4, knight d8, bishop b6, e6, bishop into d8, rook c into d8, knight into e6, rook into e6, queen into d8 check, king h7, queen h4 check, king g8, rook d1, rook e8, rook d8, queen f7, b3, e3, rook into e8 check, queen into e8. Now king f1, queen e5, queen d8 check, king g7. Now Tal giving the last check with queen d7 check. Now king h6 and queen into b6. At this position both players are agreed to a draw. Now we are in the modern era, so we can see this game with another angle. what engine could suggest. So engine suggested knight f3, now knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, d4, e6 or d5. Now bishop f4, knight h5, bishop d2, g6, e3, bishop g7, bishop e2, short castle, a6, h3, queen d6, e4, d into e4, knight into e4, queen d5, knight c3 and queen d6. Okay, so that's a position you can think about, or you can practice this position for improving your game. And thanks for watching, guys. I hope you will learn and enjoy. So we will meet you soon, and for the next videos just click the link below or go to the next video. So I hope we will meet you soon. Till then, bye bye.